Well, we got a lot to talk about, so we might as well just get down to it. Let's start with, well, we usually cover angles here, right? But for today, the Vince McMahon documentary came out, and I didn't watch any of it, but you guys did. So I guess I'll ask you guys for comments. So I'm relying on you guys, because usually I have a summary review, but today I don't have one. I don't have anything. I have not watched this at all. I don't really want to watch it. Here, let me put a picture up here for this. There we go. There he is, Mr. McMahon, the documentary, huh? Netflix, the one we've all been waiting for, I guess, or a lot of people, because Mr. McMahon has been in the news, right? So obviously the whole big scandal, P. Diddy-esque scandal, but P. Diddy, I guess, it's helping Mr. McMahon because at least it gets his name out of the news a little bit, but he's not the only one. But anyways, I don't usually speak like personal, non-wrestling stuff on this show. Personally, my favorite thing about wrestling is the storylines and the angles and the matches and the actual show itself. Whatever happens personally in these people's lives, whatever, it's not my business. But okay, it's big news and a lot of people care. And from what I heard, you guys actually watched this thing or whatever. What is it, 4 episodes already or something? Or
it was how many episodes? It was six episodes.
And they've already aired all 6 episodes.
Yeah, it's all there. It's all there to be seen.
Have you seen it all?
I saw it all, yeah.
I'm halfway through episode 5, so I'm almost finished with it.
Okay. All right. Well, Vlad, you want to do a review of the Vince McMahon Netflix documentary? I mean, just a general review, whatever thoughts you have. I'm going to put 90 seconds on the clock for you.
Sure.
If we have to talk about it more or if it leads to some other discussion, that's okay. But you go ahead. The floor is yours.
Well, I mean, I think from like a wrestling fanatical point of view, there's a lot of stuff there that I kind of already knew. I mean, I don't really think of these issues all that often, but obviously I knew a lot of these scandals. We really don't know, we can't really judge Vince completely on all of these things because we don't really know the truth. Like, they're talking about a whole bunch of different scandals, not even talking about the new scandal, of course, that's been going on since 2022. But I'm talking about like the stuff that went on in the 80s, being accused of rape by a female ref, all these different things.
So they go over every scandal he's ever had?
Well, no, it's. I think originally this whole thing was supposed to be like just like a historical view of WWE when it was originally made, or it was when it was planning to be made, because they were following, I guess, Vince since like 2021, I want to say. Or they sat down with him since 2021. So they had some good insights, some good video and things like that. So it was more of just a broader, it was supposed to be like a historical view of like everything that had gone on in WWE and Vince. But what I think was missing here is like what actually makes like Vince Mr. McMahon, quote unquote, like what goes on in his life that makes him what he is. I think it really just focused on the history of WWF, WWE, and all the different scandals that he has been involved in, which everybody already knows. Like a lot of the stuff that, I mean, if you're not like a diehard, you might not know, okay? But most people knew about this stuff. I think the one thing that was missing is like, what makes him tick? Like what makes him Vince McMahon? Like they had all these supposedly hours of talking to him, and there wasn't really a focus on like his personal life. Like it was just really the wrestling. And
so you think there was some trauma or something like that
we
made
know
his
the
character
trauma,
what he is?
Well, we know the trauma that the story that he tells, that he lived really badly in the beginning of his first 12 years of life, that he was abused by his stepdad and maybe his mother. That part's not really clear. Or that he was abused, and he was beat up until he was 12, and then he met up with his real father, obviously Vincent, not Kennedy McMahon, I forgot his middle name, but
Vincent J. McMahon,
who was obviously in charge of, I guess at that time it was the WWF or whatever it was called at the time. But anyways, part of the Northeast territory. I think we know that part, but we don't know anything else. We just know that. That's the story that he's always told, but we don't really know what makes him like who he is. And I think that part was missing somewhat, because they supposedly had like hundreds of hours of interview with him, but from what they showed, they just really focused on like what happened historically within wrestling, outside of the scandals that they mentioned really as well. But I think that's the only thing. I mean, it was good. I would say I enjoyed it from a wrestling standpoint of view, but I think there could have been some other analysis done as well. But that's it. Overall, I did enjoy it.
All right, well, let me jump to Robert before I ask a follow-up question. But Robert, you want to give your review of this? 90 seconds or more, whatever.
Yeah. All right. So on several occasions during this series, the show does specify in text that the majority of these interviews took place before the most recent scandal with Vince McMahon.
Right.
So it makes sense of it because this series it looks like it was more about WWE in general. But then after the recent scandal with Vince McMahon, they decided it looks like they edited this to really focus on Vince, and they're marketing it as a Mr. McMahon documentary where it's it is about Mr. McMahon, but it's also about the rise of WWE in general.
Yeah.
But they're marketing
tied to him.
but they're marketing this as a Mr. McMahon docuseries, which it kind of is. I think they just edited it that way. It was. I don't think it was meant to be that way to begin with. Well, a lot of the information that was presented in this, I did know about a lot of them, but there are some things that I didn't know, like the stuff about Pat Patterson and the Ring Boys. That I never knew until this series, and even
I heard about that. But...
even the stuff that I did know, like for example, the steroid trial. Like in other documentaries that I've watched, they kind of just gloss over the trial and say, "Oh, so this trial happened and Vince won," right? But they didn't really go into too much detail in other documents that I watched. This one did go into some, so there were. I knew the story of it, I heard of it, but I didn't know some of the details that they revealed about the trial, and that's just one example. I mean, it's an interesting watch, but people who've been following wrestling for years, not a lot of this information is not going to be new for you guys. But I mean, if you have the time and you're interested, I go ahead and watch it. But if it's something that you're not already interested in watching it, it's not something I would try to recommend you to watch. It's not a lot of new information, basically.
All right, one follow-up question, I guess. What do you guys think that the effect of this scandal coming out had on the documentary? Do you think it would have been completely different if this whole thing didn't come out recently?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Because as they said, they found out in the middle of, I guess, still producing this whole thing and the interviews with Vince that there was this potential scandal that was coming. And then obviously he stopped talking to Netflix because he was going through whatever the heck the scandal is. So yeah, I mean, obviously it changed the whole of what they were planning to do and how they decided to do it. I mean, I think it was going to be focused on Vince, but not maybe they weren't going to focus on all the negative. I mean, they were probably going to mention it, but they weren't going to focus on it. But then when this came out, I mean, I think it had to be part of something. They couldn't do. If they were still going to do WWE Vince McMahon documentary type thing, they had to mention it. So yeah, it definitely changed it.
All right, and do you think it was fair?
I mean, who's to say? I mean, Vince probably doesn't. I think from what I saw, it was pretty fair. I mean, it had a lot of the talking heads there. I mean, specifically, I loved Tony Atlas and Bret Hart, who were tremendous in this whole. You know who was actually pretty good? And I've never given this guy any credit. So Dave Meltzer was good in this documentary. Oh, yeah. I can't believe I was going to say this, but Dave Meltzer was actually one of the bright spots in this whole thing when I was talking about I mean, I've never really liked Dave.
But do you think it was fair?
Yes, he was good.
Well, this is a tough question because everyone's waiting on the verdict of whether all this stuff
that's hard to say because we don't really know the truth. We don't know the truth.
But,
we don't know.
But in terms of his history or his history of what he means to wrestling, we all know that. Irregardless of the scandal, we know how great he is in terms of wrestling. Was it fair in
only
that
in
regard?
Terms of wrestling, but not if you talk what I think of Vince as a human being. I mean, you have to. That's
okay.
It's hard to draw.
I'll make the question more specific. In terms of wrestling, was it fair to his legacy?
I mean, I think so because it did focus on the rise and how it did focus on the good things about WWE and how he was basically the responsible party. He took over from his dad and he made it what it is. So, I mean, they did focus on that as well. I mean, I think a large focus was on that specifically, on what he did, and that he was a quote unquote genius, in a sense. So I don't know. I would say it was pretty fair. But, I mean, there's no way you could just have a documentary like this and not talk about the bad, though. Like you have to mention that. You have to mention the bad. It has to be brought up at the very least. Whether we know what he did or didn't do, or know like what he was part of, we don't really know the full story, but it has to be mentioned at the very least.
Okay, Robert, did you have any final comments before we move on? Did you think it was fair in terms of the wrestling? The other stuff, we don't know. Okay.
Well, I do, because a lot of it is public knowledge already, so it has to be addressed, right? And it's, the funny thing about your question is that on a couple of times during this docuseries, Vince McMahon says he doesn't play fair. He says that. Sure. You hear him say that, like, I don't play fair. I cheat and I win. So okay.
Yeah.
So well, all right then.
All right. Well, let's move on from Vince McMahon. I don't know. I never liked him much as a person because I was a big WCW fan and I didn't like how the whole thing went down. And yes, he doesn't play fair. So maybe this whole thing is what he deserves. What can I say? I don't know.
Well, that's the thing. Okay, before we move on, that's one of the main points, is that he was crying a lot about Ted Turner stealing his talent. And even Bischoff mentioned in this documentary, like, dude, that's what you did in the 80s. You stole everybody's talent. That's how you got to where you were. And then he's like trying to write history that he's that Turner was trying to steal, put him out of business. Dude, he put every territory out of business. So you can't feel too sorry for Vince. He is a hypocrite in that regard, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll leave it at that.
All right, well, let's move on from Vince McMahon, dude. We thought we were rid of Vince. We don't want to talk about Vince anymore, right? We're happy to be rid of Vince. WWE is doing much better without him, right?
All right,